His pace slowed, then stopped. He drew back just enough to make me look up there. Here he said, calm as ever. Now the real fun starts, and just like that. He left, walking out to greet them. Before we jump in real quick, most of you who enjoy these videos still haven't subscribed. If you're one of them, please take a second to hit that button. It helps with channel growth so much and means more than you know. And if you're already subscribed, thank you. Now let's begin. Rick's hands were firm on my waist as he moved against me. Slow and deliberate, like he had all the time in the world. I was perched on the kitchen counter, dressed, bunched up, pulled close against him. Breath caught as I struggled to stay quiet. The game was blaring from the living room, my dad and his friends shouting at the screen just 20 feet away. Rick was one of my dad's closest friends, older, quieter, but nothing about him felt hesitant. He was steady, focused. Every motion intentional, every shift filled with control. He moved like a man who knew exactly how to take his time. And that was exactly what drew me to him. His breath brushed my ear. "You like this, don't you?" He whispered, voice rough and low. The risk I couldn't speak? I clung to his shoulders and nodded, barely stifling a sound as he leaned in closer. His focus tightened, confident and unshaken. I felt the counter creak beneath us, his grip steady as he held me in place. I didn't want him to stop the sounds from the living room. Ice and glasses, laughter. The rise and fall of voices only made it worse or better. I couldn't tell anymore. My dad was right there. So were his other friends. And I was tangled up with one of them like I never wanted to let go. I covered my mouth with my hand, breath trembling, barely holding myself steady. His attention never wavered. If anything, he seemed even more drawn in by how close we were. Then he froze. I looked up. Breath sharp, Tom stood in the doorway. One of my dad's oldest friends. The loudest of the three, always cracking jokes. Now completely silent, Rick jolted back. "Already straightening up, go." He muttered. I slid off the counter, heart still racing, heat pulsing under my skin, and hurried upstairs. I lay on my bed, still flushed, dress clinging to my legs. My pulse hadn't slowed, the energy still hummed under my skin. The sounds of the game kept coming from downstairs. A while later, quiet footsteps. The sound of the front door opening, then closing. They were gone. But what Rick started, I could still feel everywhere. The next day, just afternoon, I got a message from Tom. "You looked good last night. Want something even better?" I was already warm thinking about how he looked at me in the kitchen. The smirk, the silence, how he walked away without saying a word. He hadn't told. My dad hadn't said anything at all. But now he was saying exactly what I wanted to hear. "Come by, I'll make it worth your time." He'd always been the bold one, the loudest of the three, joking, teasing, always pushing the edge. But now it felt different. Pointed, director. Like he knew I'd say yes, and he was right. I had a weakness for older men, especially ones like my dad's friends, men who still carried themselves like they didn't have to chase anything, men who let you come to them. Rick had lit a fire in me, but this was about to fan it. I didn't bother with excuses. I told my dad I had errands to run, then got dressed without overthinking it. Something simple, something casual. The drive over was short. I barely remember the roads. Just the low hum in my chest, the pole that hadn't let up since last night, and the way my legs felt unsteady. The second I saw his name on my screen, when I pulled into the driveway, the front door was already cracked open. He was waiting. I stepped inside and shut the door behind me. Tom was on the couch, one arm resting across the back, watching me like he'd been expecting this. He didn't smile, didn't speak. Just stood, walked over, and wrapped his hands around my waist. Like we've done this before, his lips found mine. Before I could even breathe, there was no hesitation, just heat. Immediate and focused, I leaned into him, my fingers gripping his shirt, as his hands pulled me closer until my back met the door. Clothes came off fast. His fingers found every clasp like he'd memorized them. My dress slipped to the floor without a sound, and his shirt vanished as I reached for it. Nothing felt rushed, just inevitable. I moved in again, but he stopped me gently with a hand on my shoulder. "Slow," he said, voice low and steady. Then he guided me down. I lowered myself to the rug, his hand stained light but assured on my shoulder. I didn't need instruction. I already understood what he wanted, and I wanted it just as much. I leaned forward, letting instinct take over. His breath hitched quietly, fingers threading into my hair in a way that felt steady, not controlling. I set the pace deliberately, slow and careful at first, watching his reactions and listening to the way his breathing changed. He didn't say a word, but I could feel the tension build. Every shift of his body, every subtle inhale. I adjusted, adding pressure, changing pace, watching him respond. His jaw tensed, his eyes locked on mine, his whole body leaning into the moment. When he finally pulled me back up, his chest was rising unevenly. Without a word, he scooped me into his arms. I laughed softly, caught off guard, my breath short as he carried me like I weighed nothing. The hallway blurred around us, but the tension sharpened. The bedroom door was already open. He didn't stop. The moment I landed on the mattress, he was with me, not frantic, just sure. His hands traced my thighs as he knelt beside the bed, spreading them with calm, deliberate care before leaning in. I arched instinctively. He started with a whisper of touch. Barely there. A coaxing reaction from the smallest movements. Then he adjusted just enough to keep me off balance. He changed pace before I could settle, shifting pressure, exploring every spot with precise attention. I couldn't hold still. My fingers twisted in the sheets. He never gave me what I expected. Always in one step ahead, always drawing me further in. By the time he moved up, I was shaking. He hovered over me, one hand at my waist, the other braced beside my head. When our bodies met, it wasn't rushed. He moved against me with quiet certainty, every shift deliberate and smooth. I held onto his arms, as he found a rhythm that kept tightening the tension, without ever breaking it. Then he adjusted the angle, changed the pattern. My back arched, breath stuck in my throat, everything winding tighter. He wasn't just confident, he was precise. He read my reactions and adapted instantly, not by luck, on purpose. It worked. I whispered his name before I realized I had. He smiled against my neck, like that was exactly what he'd been waiting for. His pace changed again, slower, heavier, pulling me further in with each pass. I reached for the headboard, trying to hold myself steady, but the tension kept rising. I almost missed it, just a faint knock. More like a tap. Tom stilled. He kissed my collarbone once, then stood up without a word. I watched him walk away, heart thudding. They were here. Once they were inside the room, they stood near the bed, calm and composed. There was no awkwardness, no pause. Just presence. I sat up slowly, breath still uneven, and met their gaze. No one spoke. I slid to the edge of the mattress and lowered myself onto my knees. Tom stepped forward. I reached for him without hesitation, my fingers running down his thighs as I leaned in. His breath slipped out sharp and quiet, one hand brushing my cheek. Rick moved in beside him. I welcomed him with the same ease, one hand moving to him while the other kept its rhythm. I alternated, gently shifting focus between them. reacting to their movements and the way their breathing changed. Gary stepped in last. I looked up at him, then leaned in, planting a soft kiss just above his hip. His hand landed on my shoulder. Light but firm, I kept the motion going, circling between them, maintaining the rhythm as their restraints started to wear thin. When they lifted me, my whole body buzzed. Tom and Rick moved in sync, one beneath my arms. The other under my knees, they lowered me onto the bed, like I was nothing but breath and weightless heat. Gary stepped between my legs the second I settled. Finally, my turn, he said. Voice low, I didn't speak. Just waited. He leaned in with care, adjusting my position with one hand at my hip and the other behind my knee. I gripped the sheets as he began to move, measured and grounded, pulling me into his rhythm without force. Tom leaned down his mouth at my collarbone, breath skimming across my skin. Rick knelt beside me, brushing hair from my face. As he brought himself close again, I opened to him without hesitation. Gary never faltered. His movement stayed calm, steady. Tom's lips traveled lower, teasing warmth across my body. Rick brought my hand back to him, guiding me in without words. I was surrounded hands, mouth breath motion. I couldn't keep track. I didn't want to. When Gary pulled back, the shift was seamless. Tom and Rick moved again, lifting me midair. One held my back, the other my legs, and they eased me onto Tom with practiced care. I wrapped around him instinctively. He was already ready, then Rick stepped in behind. His hands landed at my hips, holding me in place. What followed was slower. Heavier, I gasped. A rush of air, no sound. My head dropped back against Rick's shoulder, as the motion between them locked into one steady rhythm. I was held, moved, surrounded, my breath fractured, pulse racing. Everything tangled in theirs. When they finally lowered me again, I was trembling, but Gary was already waiting, lying back ready. I climbed over him, palms braced on his chest, legs shaky beneath me. He caught my hips and studied me as I began to move with him. Gradual rolling rhythm that built with every shift. Tom returned behind me. His hands circled my waist, anchoring me as he pressed in closer. Each movement from him tightened the pressure between me and Gary. Then Rick stepped forward. He reached for me. I welcomed him again. Bringing him into the rhythm with us, all three together, thought vanished. Time stretched. I let go of everything, every breath, every sound. Every inch of me was wrapped in them. I didn't care where one ended and the next began. Gary was first, his breath caught, hands gripping tighter as his body went still. Tom followed his rhythm, faltering, a sound low against my shoulder before he slowed. Rick pulled back, last breath stuttering, gazed locked on mine as the air around us went quiet. Stillness fell. I collapsed onto Gary. Body weak, lungs a creen for air. My limbs were useless, my skin flushed and buzzing. No one spoke. They stood around me, present, grounded, watchful. I stayed where I was, eyes half closed, unsure how much time had passed. Then I felt it, a familiar touch at my waist. A shift behind me, a presence I already knew. Leaning in, slow, patient. Certain, my eyes opened. It wasn't over. I didn't hold back. I gave them everything I had, and they didn't let it go to waste. Be honest. Do you wish you were there too? If you were, what would you be doing? Tell me in the comments. I'll be reading before you leave. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications by clicking the bell icon, so you never miss the next one. Thanks for watching. See you soon.